Hello, my name is Dr. John Lee Welton, and this is one of a series of video recordings exploring the history of Jefferson County, Tennessee. The history of an area or a family can be quickly lost when the folks who were a part of that history are no longer with us. These videos, sponsored by the Jefferson City Library under the direction of Anjane Bruland, head librarian, hope to preserve some of our area histories through the eyes and memories of some of its local residents. Today we have with us Mr. Al Lang. Mr. Lang is the archivist of the Mildred L. Iddens Special Collections and the Special Collections Library of Carson Newman University. He is a member of the Tennessee Baptist Historical Society and the Society for Tennessee Archivists. He, along with Linda Gass, is the author of two books, The Pictorial History of Jefferson City and Carson Newman College, the Campus Series. Welcome and thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. First of all, let's explore your personal background. Where were you born, and sort of bring us up to date on that?
I was born in New Jersey. My dad was from New Jersey, about an hour outside of New York City, and my mom was from Pittsburgh. I grew up there until I went to college at Wheaton College outside of Chicago, where I met my wife. I was from Knoxville, and after traveling around a little bit, going back and forth to graduate schools and figuring out what I wanted to do when I grew up, realized I wanted to get into the field of library science. And so God provided this job 21 years ago, and we've been here ever since.
Well, that's great. Tell us about your current family.
I have three children. My oldest is about to be 20. He's just finished his freshman year here at Carson Newman. My next child is going to be a freshman here at Carson Newman in the fall. And then we have our youngest is in middle school.
All right. The job as archivist at Carson Newman is what brought you here. What were some of your first impressions of Jefferson City and Jefferson County and Carson Newman?
I had a wonderful experience when I was in college at Wheaton, which was a college about the same size as Carson Newman, so I really related to the school in terms of its size and its atmosphere, being a Christian liberal arts college. The town was by far the smallest place I had ever lived in, having lived an hour outside of New York and an hour outside of Chicago. But very quickly fell in love with the town and enjoyed just more of a small town atmosphere, and it's been a wonderful place to raise our children.
You've been here for 21 years. How's the area changed over that time?
Well, I think we've seen some growth in just the population overall, probably of the town, but I think it still maintains that small town feel. I remember when I first moved here, people were referring to Walmart having moved way down there, which I think was probably about 4 lights from where it had been. And so I realized some of that was relative in terms of what people thought of as being expansion.
All right, good. Share with us how Carson Newman came into existence, a little background on it.
Back in the 1840s, the local Baptists had decided there was a real need for a Baptist educational institution. And so after discussion and planning, in the fall of 1851, they opened up their doors down on Mossy Creek, utilizing what was then the First Baptist Church's original building for that first year until they could get their building built on this side of the creek. And originally that was just a boys' school, and then over the years, through numerous name changes and joining with a girls' school and various tragedies and successes, it's evolved into what we have today.
All right, good. Share with us, if you would, some of the major events of the history of college.
Yeah, back in probably, I guess, the Civil War would be one of the major events in terms of the destruction that was caused on campus. And it's really a miracle. You see how God over the years has enabled Carson Newman to continue to flourish despite some serious setbacks. But the Civil War, the school was closed for a number of years. The college badly damaged its buildings, but was able to rebound from that and begin classes again. 1916 saw the first of 2 fires, which destroyed the major building on campus, the administration building. Another fire in 1974 on that same location was another devastating event. But once again, able to rebound from those things.
But, excuse me, let's back up just a little bit. There was a rather interesting way that Carson and Newman got its name. Share that with us, if you would. Yeah,
back at girls' school at the time, Newman College, had existed for about 7 years, between 1882 and 1889. And then in 1889, the two schools joined, becoming Carson and Newman College. Eventually the hyphen was dropped. But that was a very exciting day, I think more for the boys maybe than for the girls. And they commemorated that event with a kind of a mock wedding, they called it, where they had the joining of these two schools to become a co-ed institution.
It was an all-male wedding, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
About the closing after the Civil War, or during the Civil War, the college rebounded because of a gentleman named Jesse Baker, Professor Jesse Baker. Can you share some of that with us, please?
Yeah, Jesse Baker was someone who was really committed to the institution, and he went on a very famous horseback ride where he traveled around seeking donations and financial contributions to keep the college afloat, and was able to do that. At the time, it seemed like a tremendous amount of money that he was able to gather, and we still have his saddlebags down in the archives here, which is kind of a neat piece of history for someone that was here who really, for us, it's almost incomprehensible to ride the thousands of miles he did.
3,500 miles,
Yeah.
I believe, is the figure that he rode.
And if you think about doing that on a horse just for a minute, that's very, it's kind of sobering to realize what he did.
There is a story that he was robbed. Do you recall that story?
Yeah, I think Dr. Fite, one of our previous presidents, liked to tell that story that he was about to be robbed by some folks, and when he pleaded that this money was for a Baptist school for the education of young Baptist minds, that the would-be thieves had said, well, we're good Baptists too, so we'll let you go this time.
Right. Of course, we have to put that in context because at that time, families were starving. In many cases, that was the only way that they could feed their families. You talked about the 1916 burning of the administration building. That was one big problem. Then the Depression hit the college. This was another point where the college had real problems. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, like so many places, you know, when finances, I think, would always be an issue, you know, during those times. And when the country went into depression, of course, you know, one of the things that young people are going to have to do is going to have to go to work. And at that point, more and more education almost seems like a luxury. And so that was, again, one of those times where enrollment probably dipped some until folks could get back on their feet and then send their young people back to school.
I understand that there was one thing that saved the college, the naval officers. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, during World War II, again, a time in our country where you know, education for some had to be put on hold while young men went to war, and so that really depleted the enrollment here. But at that time, what they did was entered into an agreement with the Navy to have a V-12 officer training program. And so that brought an influx of men who stayed in the dorms and went to school. They had their own academic program. There was some overlap in terms of their involvement socially, but also with intramurals and some of the athletic programs. And that really kept the school afloat during World War II.
The officers, as I understand, lived in Sarah Swan Dormitory, which had been traditionally a woman's dormitory. The 1960s was an interesting time with the college, with integration. This was a big move for the college. Can you share with us some of the thoughts at that time?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process right now of indexing our school newspaper, the Orange and Blue. And so as I go through those decades, you kind of see in many ways the school as a reflection of the greater society and what was going on. And I think for many, there was that struggle where there was a desire to see integration. Was very slow in coming. Eventually it did. And when those doors opened, I think that was a real positive thing for the school. I remember years ago talking with a former employee here who was an African American whose parents worked on campus, and said that for her it was a very sobering time, having run around this campus as a little girl when she got to college age, realizing she wouldn't be able to attend here. So things like that kind of mirrored what was going on in society, but eventually that was changed and moved forward.
Are you talking about Gladys Clay?
Yes, yes.
Ms. Clay said that she grew up on this campus, her family worked here, she could not go to college, and yet later she came back as a faculty member.
Right, right.
Quite an irony. Dr. Feit mentioned that when they were talking about integration, one of the board of directors said, Carson Newman will integrate over my dead body. Dr. Feit said, we integrated and he didn't die.
Yep.
The 1974 burning of Henderson, can you share us a little bit about that?
Yeah, probably one of the most tragic events for a variety of reasons. You know, I had always heard that many faculty had their offices there. Some of them lost their life works that were in those offices. Happened at nighttime, and there are still people who remember coming out, watching the flames engulf that building. There was always the suspicion, very strong suspicion, I think people are fairly confident it was arson, due to the finding of numerous fires that had been set around the building. I don't believe anybody was ever caught or charged with that, but really something that I think had far-reaching effects, both emotionally, on the students and the faculty that worked here that experienced that.
Yes, indeed. I remember that very well as theater director here at Carson Newman. I understand that a firebomb was thrown into an office right under, which was under the, in the basement under the auditorium. And of course, it didn't take long for that to completely engulf the building. It was a rather interesting building because there were, after the fire, there were two pieces of steel still standing, and that's the only steel in the building, and they held up the balcony of the old auditorium. I remember getting out with one play script and one hammer. I had the play script at home, and a student had borrowed the hammer. It took, I believe, 3 years to rebuild Henderson. Another interesting thing that I'd like to ask about is Dolly Parton's graduation.
Yeah, Dolly Parton was probably one of the biggest celebrities, I guess, that we've had come through our gates, and she was offered or given, an honorary doctorate, and for her work in Appalachia with education, and that was before I was here, actually, but I know I've seen a lot of the pictures and heard stories about her, some of her, even then, one-liners, I think, to people on stage and things like that kept everybody either perhaps laughing or embarrassed. I don't know which.
Yeah, she said one of her friends asked her how she would feel with all those big wigs up there, and she said, my wig is just as big as any of them. They put the hood on her, and she said, now they can call me Dr. Double D. It was one of the most interesting graduations I ever attended. In 2001, the college turned 150 years old, and there was a big celebration during that time. Do you have any comments or recommendations or to talk about on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have always been really impressed with, and the longer that I'm here, is Carson Newman's commitment to its own history. There's a lot of schools our size that do not have a person employed in, like myself, employed as an archivist. They have perhaps a history room that's only open a couple hours a week. And so I think it says a lot about a school our size, their commitment to its own history and preserving that history. And 2001 was certainly a special year with the way things have been in the country. There had been schools that were closing that never reached that far. And so for 150 years was really a special event. And there was a lot of things that were done on campus, some publications that were done, the sesquicentennial bench that's in the middle of campus, and of course the pageant that you were involved in. Just a lot of neat things that drew attention to the school's long history.
There was also a centennial celebration. We skipped across that 100 years earlier. The college the university has changed a great deal in the last few years. Talk to us about the master's and the doctoral programs and the things that have happened along that line.
Yeah, shortly before I got here, there was some discussion about the name change in terms of changing from college to university. And that involves a variety of things, but I think at the time it was felt that we still needed to retain that college moniker due to the atmosphere that we had wanted to portray and retain in terms of this is who we are. But it was tabled that it would be discussed at a later time. And so we did eventually change to university, which I think is an important thing. I think it's been a valuable thing, especially with our recruiting of folks overseas. And also with the addition of master's, now doctoral programs. So that, I think, has been a real positive, but at the same time, I think Carson-Newman has been very committed to retaining its image for the most part and its identity as a four-year residential school. We've certainly changed in that we have many more non-traditional students. We have online classes. We have more commuter students than we've ever had. But overall, I think Carson-Newman is still Carson-Newman in terms of how a lot of people remember the school as being that residential four-year liberal arts Christian school.
Right. You mentioned it, the foreign students that we have on campus now. Would you share a little more with that?
Yeah, I teach a couple of freshman introduction classes each fall, and one of the things I became aware of just a few years ago, where I try to have some folks from global education come in, is that I'm not sure that a lot of our students realize every year we have well over 100 international students from, I'm not even sure how many countries. And that has been really, I think, a special thing that has, it's been a special part of Carson-Newman that I think a lot of people don't realize, that we have these international students that bring a tremendous wealth of experiences and culture to our campus. And we have a very special chapel every year in November that highlights those cultures and those students on campus, and I think it's one of the best attended chapels that we have.
If I recall correctly, we have represented about 30 different countries, if
I think so.
Right on that. The last few years, Carson-Newman has received a number of national awards. Would you tell us about those, please?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I'm sure the folks that have worked here for years would tell you. It's nice to get national recognition for what we already knew.
Yes.
In terms of the quality of teaching and the quality of the programs that we offer, while still maintaining that close-knit feel and having a small ratio of faculty to students and maintaining this more of an intimate classroom setting. But not compromising on academic integrity and offering these programs that are now, I think when I first started here, Carson-Newman was probably recognized more within the region, and a lot of the accolades it received were more regional, whereas now I think it's more of on a national scope.
What about the growth of Carson-Newman, attendance-wise?
Yeah, I think we've had, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 years now, perhaps, of record enrollment. Our graduate program is just really kind of off the charts, the number of folks that we've had come into the graduate school. It's all very exciting to hear those numbers every year, that they're just increasing. And
this happened when we became a university rather than just Carson-Newman College. Opened up those opportunities for other things. Can you recall some events about the presidents that might have been outstanding through the years, and especially since you've come here?
Mm-hmm. When I came here, Dr. Cordell Maddox was here. I was hired when he was here, and of course he was, I believe, the longest serving president in terms of years. But a lot of growth on campus, new buildings, football stadium, new dormitories came, some when he was here, some after. Through Dr. Netherton and Dr. O'Brien. I tend to look at, I think more and more the older I get, history, we look at history almost as people are as characters, and we don't realize that they are people just like us with their own quirks and concerns and all of that. And so the longer I've been here, I've tended to look at the folks throughout the years more, trying to get a feel for them as people, not just characters. And we have in the library a big mural that was done of all of the presidents back from the very beginning. And there's 3 or 4 that we don't have pictures of. And that bothers me, because I want to be able to look into their eyes and try to catch that glimpse of who they were, what they were like. And some of them we perhaps will never have the pictures of them. But yeah, it's been over the last 21 years since I've been here. It's been interesting to get to know some of the presidents and see their different styles and what they've brought to campus and how they've interacted with faculty and staff and led us to where we are today.
Had you met Dr. Fite?
I did have the privilege of knowing Dr. Fite. Yeah, he was here from 1948 to 1968, and I'm not sure that any of the other presidents have the title like he does of being the great builder. And I think it was over 20-something buildings that were constructed, which is just kind of phenomenal when you think about it. I'm not sure that we've had more than maybe 5 buildings under any other president since I've been here, maybe not even that. But just a real personality, a real character, I guess, if you were. The stories that people told of him. We had just been talking earlier about him reaching almost 102 years old.
He was almost 102 years old, and yet gave the winter commencement address before his death in December.
Yeah.
Wrote a joke book. Very had a great sense of humor, which probably kept him going for those 20 years here at the college. And
I remember just meeting him, always speaking to him, always had a smile on his face when he would greet you, and just somebody who was really a kind of a mover and shaker, I guess, on this campus that helped probably really transition from, after World War II, transitioning into the 60s and then setting a real foundation for the future.
Right. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share with us today?
I think since I have been here, I have become aware, having not grown up in Jefferson City, Jefferson County, but kind of being a transplant here, just really appreciating the history of this area and being well aware that I am always going to be a student of that history, having had to read about a lot of it, not necessarily experiencing it firsthand, but yet appreciating what the people of this area have done and how this area has grown and the special place that it is to live. And I've loved living here, and I couldn't ask for a better job in terms of what I do in preserving the history of the school and the local area.
The archives are named the Mildred Iddens. Could you tell us a little bit who Mildred Iddens was?
Mildred Iddens was a former head librarian here, and before we had an official archive, she, along with Imogene Brewer, another librarian that was here, had a real eye for history and interest in history, and we owe so much to them for identifying things that needed to be set aside, and they really created the foundation for our archives and special collections. And so fortunately they named it after her, which I think is very well fitting.
How has it grown since you took over?
Since I've been here, I think what we've tried to do, Linda Gass, my colleague, and I have tried to have the 3 branches of the special collections stand on their own, both intellectually and physically within the building. We have an Appalachian collection, our Baptist archives, and then our university archives. And those 3 collections tie into the school's identity as being a Baptist Appalachian university. And so we've really tried to make each of those collections have its own collection development policies and be able to stand on its own as we've added to those. There is a lot of overlap between the 3 of them, but we've really been able to, I think, grow those collections into some resources that people all over the country have been able to take advantage of.
You are an archivist for the Baptist denomination. Can you share some of the backgrounds and changes that might have happened over the years dealing with your work?
Back in the mid-1980s, the Tennessee Baptist Convention decided that there was a need to have each of the then 3 Baptist schools. There was Union in the west, Belmont in Middle Tennessee, and then Carson-Newman in East Tennessee. Each one of those schools should have a Baptist collection. And the convention provided a stipend for us to do that, financial stipend to do that. And so over the years, we have tried to fulfill that, what was committed to us to grow that collection. Back in, I believe it was 2007, when Belmont broke ties with the convention, their historical material went into storage. And we had asked for permission if we could have that material. And so the convention very graciously sent all that material to us. So now we maintain the Middle and East Tennessee Baptist archives, documenting Baptist history in our regions of the state, and Union maintains a collection that documents West Tennessee.
All right, thank you. Anything else you'd like to share before we close?
No, I don't think so. I think that covers quite a bit.
Okay, thank you, Al. You've done a great job in covering the history of the college. The college is one that is known for retaining its faculty for many years, and hopefully you'll have another 21 years unless you get ready to retire.
Yeah, I hope so.
You mentioned the archives and the different branches. Could you share with us some of the unique things that the archives hold?
Yeah, our archives have some things that are really pretty interesting. One of the neatest things that we have is a wooden trunk that belonged to William Rogers, who was our first president in 1851. Unfortunately, he died before he was even 35 years old. And he's buried here in Jefferson County. He's one of the people we do not have a picture of, so we're not really sure what he looks like. And the only artifact that we have is this green trunk of his. But for me, that kind of gives me a personal glimpse. I wonder what he looked like and what he put in that trunk when he came here, and what his thoughts were being the first president. One of the other things that we have that's really neat is a Civil War Confederate revolver that was given to us back in the 1970s. It was a Griswold and Gunnison revolver. I did a little bit of research on this. There was a little over 3,000 that were made of these. And the story that went with it, and whether this can be verified or not, the lady that gave it to the school said that her father was a doctor who traveled throughout East Tennessee treating people, and he treated a man who had no money to pay him. And so he gave him the revolver, and he said that when he was a younger man, he had ridden with Jesse James. So that's kind of it would match up time-wise, but whether that is true, I'm not sure. But there are 13 notches that are filed in the handle of that. And so you can kind of, I guess, use your imagination what that means. But also in our Appalachian and Rare Book Room, we have a book. The oldest book that we have, the oldest item that we have in the library, is a book from 1590, and it's a history of Britain. And as you look through that, there are some annotations that are in the margins of this book. And every now and then, when I get that book out and I look at it, I think to myself, what did the person look like who read this book and who made these hand notes in there, and what were they thinking? And it's fascinating to me to pick that up and realize all those hundreds of years ago there was somebody probably just like us that got that book off the shelf and sat down to read it.
How did that come into our possession, do you know?
That was one of the books, I believe. There was a gentleman whose family, his last name was Burnett, that was very closely related to the school, who they had taught here. They were donors to the school, and I believe he was a collector of rare books. And somewhere along the line, long before I got here, his collection of books was donated to the library.
I'm not sure this is under your umbrella, but share with us about the Bible display that we have now on the first floor here.
Yeah, the St. John's Bible, the project that was done by the monks, the group up in Minnesota. Fascinating kind of history in the making, as it were. The first handwritten Bible that was done in hundreds of years. We were able to get a donor who purchased one of the very high-end reproductions of the original, and we had some very gracious folks that have paid for a display room that's on the main floor of our library. Along with some artifacts from the Middle East. It's just a fascinating collection that folks are able to come by and tour that and look at that, and you can just spend hours looking at it.
How would one find access to that if you were just coming to the library?
You're able to contact our library. It's 865-471-3335. That's our main number, and if you call, you can make arrangements through our folks down at the front desk to come and see that. And
I understand that as long as you're wearing gloves, you can turn the pages of it.
Yeah, they will allow you to. There's certain days where the cases are open and they turn the pages, and they have the cases locked, though, where you're just able to view what's out there. But there are times when they can make special arrangements.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, this is just one of a series of interviews being produced by the Jefferson City Library. If you have a special interest in the history of the Jefferson County, please inquire at the Jefferson City Library about the other video interviews in this series. I'm Dr. John Lee Welton, urging you to explore your own family histories and record them in writing, audio recordings, or video recordings before they're lost forever. Thank you. Thank you, Al.
Thanks.
Nice job.